Welcome to the Moffitt Method podcast, where longtime strength and conditioning coach Tommy Moffitt explores everything from the art of coaching, improving performance, sports nutrition, and mental training. Now, welcome your host, Coach Tommy Moffitt.
Welcome to the Moffitt Method podcast, and I am your host, Tommy Moffitt. If you're listening for the first time, please take a moment to subscribe to the podcast and share it with your friends. For more information about the Moffitt Method remote speed, strength, and conditioning program for teams and our new Moffitt Method one-to-one coaching program for athletes of all ages, please visit our website, themoffittmethod.fit, or email us at info@themoffittmethod.fit. Our very informative guest today is Dr. Tom Broback. Tom is a physical therapist who has worked in orthopedic rehabilitation since 2017. Over the course of his career, Tom has worked in several aspects of health and fitness, including strength and conditioning and orthopedic physical therapy. Currently, he sees clients virtually to address their chronic knee pain and meniscus injuries. A strong advocate for learning, Tom graduated from St. John's University with a bachelor's degree in biology. He also graduated with a Doctorate of Physical Therapy from the University of Minnesota. Tom has spoken at several national and regional conferences and brings a wealth of practical knowledge to our podcast today. Tom is an author of multiple ebooks and hosts his own podcast. Tom's work has been featured in Simply Faster, Exercise.com, and several podcasts in the field of rehab and performance. Welcome to the podcast, Tom.
Thanks for having me on, Tommy. Excited to talk shop with you. I really appreciate it, and we're going to go over a lot of good things today.
Yeah, this is my first official physical therapist that I've had on here. You know, everyone has been a coach or some type of practitioner in the actual weight room. And so you're the first physical therapist that we've had on, and I'm excited about our conversation.
That's awesome. I used to put a lot of stock into what everyone's profession was, like who's a physical therapist, who's a chiropractor, who's a strength and conditioning coach. And then you meet some pretty incredible individuals, and it doesn't matter what their title is. It's like, wow, you know a lot about the body. You know a lot about anatomy. You know how to make athletes better. You know how to help people recover. So sometimes those titles mean something, and sometimes it's more about the person and how they ultimately interact with others.
Yeah. Well, that's why I'm excited about you today. So let's get started with what led you to seek a career in physical therapy.
Yeah, so that's a really good question because there's multiple things that go into it, right? It's never just one thing. Growing up, I was really involved in sports. I love sports, playing them, watching them, collecting cards, doing fantasy football, always active in sports, right? And my dad and my brothers and my friends and my neighbors, like we were all, like that's what we want to do all the time. That was such a passion of ours. So growing up, I was always involved in sports. Obviously, with sports come injuries and setbacks. And also there's this whole kind of strength and conditioning side to get you better at your sport when you might not be the most naturally gifted at what you're doing. So all of that kind of growing up was like, oh, like I want to keep doing something like this the rest of my life. What does that look like? Obviously, at some point for all of us, playing sports at a highly competitive level comes to an end. So, all right, what's the next best thing I can do? Oh, I can help athletes play their sport, right? So I looked into coaching, I looked into athletic training, I looked into strength and conditioning, looked into a lot of different things. Ended up falling on physical therapy. It's all right, this is a really good route, a really good career, and I can still do all these things that I want to do. So ended up going to physical therapy school. All of that went well. Came out of physical therapy school, and I was like, okay, so I can help people in this route, but there's so much more to it than just rehab, because the best thing is for people not to get hurt, right? So that is on the preventative side, right? Like the prehab side, whatever you want to call it. And that's where more of like the personal training, strength and conditioning, that kind of part comes in. And that's where my philosophy really got developed is, okay, how do I apply what I learned in school with the kind of like the training aspect, training on my own, training friends, training people, working and talking to other coaches. How do I blend those two things together? Because I think ultimately that's what rehab should be. It should look like you're training. It's just you're starting at a different point. So when those two things came together, really started developing, hey, this is how I want to take an active approach to my patients. This is how I can help them. And I can help them at any point that they want, whether they're hurt or not hurt, whether they had surgery or didn't have surgery. And then you become this ultimate weapon for people to access and to improve their lives from a physical health standpoint, regardless of where they're at.
Yeah, for most people, their first connection with the physical therapy is after an injury. They get a script, they go to the doctor, they get a script, they go see a PT, and that for most, that's their first contact with one. So yeah, I see that. All right, can you
There's a really
talk
good
about? Yeah, go ahead.
there's a really good quote. It's like no one grows up wanting to be a physical therapist. And I always laugh at that because when you ask kids what they want to be when they grow up, it's like doctor, lawyer, fireman, astronaut. Astronaut's always a funny one because like no one like it's really hard to be an astronaut, right? You have to be like really
Yeah,
smart and it's really dedicated and not many people like go to the moon and walk on the moon. But that's kind of a little kid. You always think of that. But no, physical therapy, it's kind of like, hey, you get introduced to it, whether a family or a friend was a PT
yeah.
or you were going through it yourself, and then you kind of develop all these other things that lead to it. But yeah, I always thought that was funny.
Yeah, I tried to talk my two oldest sons into going into physical therapy, and it didn't work for either one. So I gave up on the third one. They were like, "No, I don't want to do that." I thought they would have been good at it though. So, can you talk to us about your virtual? And this is the main reason I had you on here because I wanted to find out, about this and how it all got started. So, can you talk about your virtual PT practice and why you decided to go out on your own, and how does remote rehab actually work?
Absolutely. Yeah. So there's a lot of different things that go into this. I'll go back to like my undergrad days where it's like, okay, I want to find like a stable career that I can do well at, that has normal hours and is just like really consistent and I can build a career from there. And that was one part of the reason I went into physical therapy. So go through grad school, spend all the time in grad school, come out, get a good stable job. It's like, all right, this is great. Like I have like this clinic I can go to, like people can come see me. And then I started to realize like you can connect with people on social media more than just like friends. You can connect with colleagues, you can connect with future clients or future patients, and then you can like build this business through Instagram or Twitter or email or LinkedIn, whatever you want to use. So I started doing that a few years ago. It's like wow, like my world is this big, it's small, and the world out there is huge. And if I can tap into that huge world, the 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 possibilities are endless, right? I'm not just confined to Minneapolis, Minnesota. I can talk to you right now, like we're not even in the same state. Like this is awesome.
Right.
Like even before, and what the real tipping point was COVID because everything went virtual.
Yeah.
Started doing podcasts virtual. Started thinking about okay, all my friends are working virtually, or a lot of them are, but like PT, like you can't. Like I'm stuck. I felt stuck. Like I have to work in person all the time, and there's some parts of that are great. I love like when you talk to someone in person, it's always different than on the phone, than on a Zoom call, and then over texting. Like we all know that, right? So I wanted to figure out, okay, how do I figure out a way, at least to do like a hybrid version or fully virtual, because that gives me more, it gives me more options, both for me, where I can live, where I can travel, what hours I work, that kind of stuff. But also like my reach is so much bigger because if someone messages me from Louisiana, from Tennessee, from Florida, in the past, I'd be like, yeah, like I'll help you find someone near you. But it's like, wait, why am I doing that? Why can't I just work with them? We have texting, we have all these great apps, we have social media, we have Zoom. Like I gotta be able to figure out how to make this work. I just didn't know like how. I didn't know the vehicle,
Hmm.
right? I knew the path was possible. I didn't know the vehicle. So a year and a half ago, I joined this mentorship group that was run by a physical therapist who teaches other PTs how to be hybrid and how to be virtual. I was like, all right, this is perfect. This is exactly what I'm thinking because I can only So my old job, I was seeing 9 people a day, 5 days a week. So it's 45 people a week. And some of that is exciting and some of that is exhausting. Like I'm not built to have that many conversations in a day with just 9 random people. And some of them
Right.
you develop really good relationships. It's great, right? But some of them it's just like, this isn't like, I can't give my
Yeah.
best because I'm doing 9
Yeah.
40-minute appointments a day. Just like it's tough. So, all right, how do I figure out the virtual part? So join the mentorship. They helped me start building stuff out and then started gaining traction on Instagram, on Twitter, through email. And then once you start doing that, it's like, okay, like how do I go bigger? How do I go broader? Start jumping on podcasts, start publishing ebooks, you just build and build and build. And it's kind of led to what I do today. So what I do now is, let's say you hurt your knee and you need help getting better. We would jump on an initial Zoom call, make sure you're appropriate for working together. We would look at your knee because there's a lot of tests we can do that are just virtual, like squat, range of motion, balance. It's the same stuff I would do in clinic, but we're just
Right.
doing over a Zoom call, right?
Yeah.
So we do that. We figure out where your starting
That's
point
awesome.
is, right? Yeah, it is. And it's like, I should have thought, and it's so nice because everyone knows how to use Zoom now. And the one benefit for me from the pandemic was everyone went virtual. They figured out how to use social media, how to use Zoom. They were comfortable with the virtual stuff. So then I just kind of slid in and be like, hey, you can do this too. And most people have no idea that you can do physical therapy virtually. You do rehab virtually. But it's like, if you can do your exercises at home and you have an iPhone, like we're good to go.
That's awesome, man. That is awesome. And, you found a niche and, you've have done well with it. So, the social media part, that's how I found you. And, I was just sitting there thumbing through Instagram or Twitter, and I came up on your account and I started reading it because it's, when you're 60 and bored, that's what you tend to do. I was sitting on the back porch watching the hummingbirds feed, and I was like, man, this guy, we're similar in our thoughts. So that's why I reached out to you. It was kind of, for me, it was like, this is the PT that I'm going to have on. So here you are. So I've got 1,000 questions for you regarding injuries and rehab and all kinds of stuff. So let's get started and let's go.
Perfect.
I've been around some really aggressive non-surgical orthopedics, physical therapists, sports med people during my career. And I've considered myself blessed because they didn't want to shelf someone, with the slightest little injury that they had. They were always let's rehab it first and see what happens kind of practitioners versus just, cutting on somebody or, ordering an MRI. So when I started reading your stuff, again, I was intrigued by your straightforwardness and your passion for non-operative approach to sports injuries. And so that's the type of stuff I want to talk about. So can you tell us how you got to this point and why you feel that not all sport-related injuries need to be surgically repaired?
Yeah, that is really good. I just have this story in my head where my current mentor, who helped me with my Twitter, he told me the story about Kanye West, and he was working with his producer. I think it's Rick Rubin, and Rick told Kanye, if your song can be on someone else's album, like it's not a good song. Like you can only write stuff that can only be on your album. So when I talk on Twitter, when I come on podcasts, when I engage with clients, it doesn't mean I have to do things that are like super out there, but they have to be me. They have to be unique. They have to be forward thinking, aggressive. I love that word, aggressive. I've always said like modern or progressive, but I actually like aggressive because when you have an injury and you go on Google, it tells you to rest. It tells you to ice. It tells you go to your doctor, get a cortisone, get some imaging to make sure. And there's time and place for some of that stuff, but not every injury needs that. And the problem is most people just don't know where to start, and they're really afraid of making things worse. When in reality, if you do nothing, like you're automatically making it worse because you're not going back. You're not even getting back to baseline, and your baseline wasn't good enough because you got hurt in the first place. Now, some injuries, like we can't, like if you play football, like there's gonna be contact injuries you just can't avoid. If you
Right.
get in a car crash, like things like that, like you can't avoid them. But your response to the injury or your response to the accident, or that's determined by your philosophy, by your habits, by how much investment you put into your body ahead of time, and that response time is what matters, because we're not going through life trying to avoid injuries, right? If you want to avoid injuries, you're going to walk and sit on the couch, right? And then you're going to have all
Yeah.
these other health complications. So the goal isn't really to avoid injury. Like that's not the mindset to have. Obviously, I don't want anyone to get hurt. We want to reduce the chance of getting hurt, right? But we want to increase our response to an injury as best as possible. So a hamstring strain doesn't take us out for 6 weeks, or a meniscus tear doesn't end our season, or if you tear your ACL and you do have surgery, you do come back and play your sport, and you don't just give it up because it seems too hard. And I went through some of my own injuries where, in high school, I broke my foot. I've had multiple hernia surgeries. I grew up with asthma. So I had all these different health complications. And the advice at the time was just kind of, rest, ice, take these steroids for your asthma, take this inhaler. There was nothing really pushed on, like, you need to go work with somebody for your physical health. You need to do these breathing exercises. You need to look at your nutrition, look at your sleep. I know you work out, but like, are you actually doing things when you're working out that are improving your ability to respond to these injuries? Are you just putting up a bunch of weight on the squat rack and bench press and think that's enough? So kind of some of that personal experience. And then when you work with patients, the ones that they're awesome and they're challenging because they get hurt and they just want to keep going. They just want to keep doing their stuff, right? So if you can channel that energy into, okay, you can't, let's just say you have like an Olympic weightlifter, right? And they want to get back to doing snatches and they can't snatch right now because their shoulder hurts. It's like, okay, we're going to take all that energy you did into snatching. We're going to do it into isometrics. We're going to do it into these other exercises. We're going to just audit your daily life. Like, what's your stress? What's your sleep? What's your nutrition? Put all your energy into that so you can get back to snatching faster. And those people tend to do the best. So when you're on my side of things, it's like, okay, the people that are the most aggressive end up doing the best if you channel that energy right. People who take 2 weeks off and don't really do much, they have the most challenge, and sometimes they end up not getting back to their goals. So like that can't be the route that we always thought, like rest and ice for 2 weeks. I always talk about that. It's just not the best way. It just can't be the best way. We weren't designed to do that. So that really kind of pushed me too, is just seeing like, wait, people who are the most aggressive do the best. Let's explore that more.
Yeah. So that reminds me of we had two kids that had torn their ACL, and they had surgery just a few days apart. One actually strained his MCL, so he had to wait a while for the MCL to heal. And then the other kid, and they were, practicing, actually contact, guys falling on each other in practice. Neither one of them had gotten hurt in a game. But one was very aggressive, like you just talked about, and the other complained about everything they had him to do. And I'm sure you've experienced those. Everything that they asked him to do, he complained about. This is too hard. This hurts, this, that. And then the other one was super aggressive and pushed everything and wanted to get better. Well, the one that wanted to get better and pushed himself without the PTs and the sports medicine people pushing him, he got better and had a 5 or 6 year career in the NFL. And then the other one never got any better, and still to this day never played football again. He attempted, he left the university that I was at, transferred, tried to play, ended up trying out for the NFL. And still to this day, he walks around blaming the surgeon and the physical therapist and people that did his rehab when it was all on him. He didn't push himself to get better. And so, yeah,
Do you see that
I'm
as
familiar.
a mindset issue?
Hmm.
Like fundamentally between the two, like, and it's not the mindset after the injury, it's going into the injury. This was
Hmm.
probably your mindset, the optimist and the pessimist, and then
Yeah,
the injury just reveals that, right?
yeah. So we've all known people that injured an ankle or a knee, hip or back, and then tried to push it with NSAIDs or then do nothing and thinking that somehow it was going to get better in a few days with ice and rest. Can you explain why NSAIDs, ice and rest are not always effective and why an aggressive rehab program is important for proper recovery and return to activity?
Right. So let's just take an example. Like you go out on a 20-minute run and you hurt your knee. You come back, your knee's swollen, it's stiff, doesn't feel good. For whatever reason, your body wasn't ready for that run, right? It could have been because you were fatigued. It could have been you didn't build up to it. You didn't ramp up to it right. It could have been a lot of different factors. You went too long on the first time, a lot of different factors. But at the end of the day, your body was not ready for that task. So you're already behind going into that task because you weren't ready for it. Now that you're hurt, like you're even more behind because you don't have full range of motion, you don't have full strength, you're in pain. Like now you're farther behind where you need to be just to do the task, right? When you do things like rest, ice, ibuprofen, that's not going to elevate your body to the demand of the task that you weren't ready for in the first place, right? Now, when we're talking about rest, I'm talking about absolute rest, like laying on the couch
Yeah.
for a full weekend, watching a bunch of football, which we all enjoy from now and then. But I'm not saying go back out and just run tomorrow, right? But you need to find uh, usually strength training activities or active activities or physical work that you can do to level your body up to meet the demands of the task that you weren't ready for in the first place. So it's not about even getting back to what your baseline was. You have to exceed your baseline because your baseline wasn't good enough for the task at hand. When you now with like ice and ibuprofen, it can give you a false sense of getting better because it's taken away some of those like pain signals that you're getting. It's like, oh, like I'm getting better. And the classic example is putting masking tape over the check engine light when your car needs to go into
Yeah.
the shop. You're not really, fixing. Or what I tell people, it's like if you're cooking tuna in like the in the microwave, like you're reheating
Yeah.
tuna up and then the whole place smells. Like at
Yeah.
some point, you just got to get the tuna out of the microwave. So
Yeah.
if you're not doing that, the problem's just gonna like keep coming back up. And the other issue is when people, so pain is a very interesting thing, right? It's very subjective. Some people have a high pain tolerance. Some people have a very low pain tolerance. And the people who have a low pain tolerance love to tell you they have a high pain tolerance. It's like, it doesn't work that way. Um, but with pain is a big driver. So when you hurt, you're going to take action. You have a headache, you're going to drink some water and go to bed earlier that night. If you sprain your ankle, you're going to go start doing physical therapy. If your girlfriend breaks up with you, you're going to eat a bowl of ice cream and watch a movie, whatever. So pain is a really big driver. The problem is when the pain starts and then when it ends, well, once it ends, you're going to stop taking action because it's like, oh, it doesn't hurt anymore. I don't need to do anything. That doesn't mean your body is leveled up to meet the demands of the task that we're just talking about. So that's where it really helps working with somebody, whether it's a coach or a therapist. What is your range of motion? What is your strength? What is your balance? What is your coordination? What is your, in ACL rehab, there's a lot of like psychological readiness to return. How do you view yourself going back to your sport? All those things matter. And if you're not checking off all those boxes and you're only looking at pain, you're probably setting yourself up for possibly future injury, but maybe not the success that you wanted in terms of performance.
Yeah. So, can you take us through uh, the more traditional phases of rehab after an injury, and then discuss how your methods may or may not be different? So, let's look at traditional rehab and then how your rehab philosophy may differ or not.
Right. Yep. So I guess we'll start with traditional rehab. So traditional rehab, let's say you hurt your knee in your game today, and then you have a game. And I'm talking when I talk about rehab, I'm talking about people like you and me. Like we're not getting paid to perform for a sport, right? I'm not talking
Right.
about professional athletes or high level college athletes or things like that because they're in a different category. One because they're they're genetically different. They're freak athletes. Like the things they can
Yeah.
do is just incredible, as you have seen throughout your career.
Yeah.
But also they're kind of like the health performance spectrum. Like it's very much geared towards performance. So if
Right.
you get hurt and you have a game 3 days from now, you kind of have to do whatever you need to, hopefully legally and ethically, to play in that game. So if I'm not going to argue in those situations because it's just so much different. I'm talking about people like you and me. Like you go on a run, your knee hurts, right?
Right.
And you want to keep running because it's fun for you, or maybe like lifting. I mean, I don't know how much you run, but lifting for sure, right? So
I
you get
ran
your
yesterday. I hate
you're there we
running, but
go.
I ran yesterday.
So yeah, you run because you know it's good for you. So let's say you hurt your knee running, right? And you need to get back. So um, what most people do is they take like a week or two off running. They'll take some ibuprofen every day. They'll ice their knee. Um, maybe they'll do some like light biking or they'll go on a walk, something like that. And then 2 weeks from now, they'll just go and do the same run. And just like we talked about, you weren't ready for the first run and you did nothing really in 2 weeks to help prepare you for the next run in terms of leveling your body up to meet the demands of the task. Yeah, you took care of symptoms, right? So you'll probably feel better. But that doesn't mean like your body's ready for it. So let's say you hurt your knee very first day. Most people have no idea what to do because they don't know what to look for, right? So when you first hurt your knee, there's kind of like four things that everyone should look for, and they're actually pretty simple. So the first two are range of motion. Can you straighten your knees all the way, and can you bend them all the way up? And we usually take we have two legs, which is nice. We can take symmetry side to side because maybe you're hyper flexible or maybe you don't have a
Mm-hmm.
ton of flexibility. So just bend your knees all the way up, or straighten them out first and then bend them all the way up. Do they look similar side to side? If yes, great, we can go on to the next thing. If not, we might have to do some passive stretching to get that range of motion back. We see that more after like a uh, like a surgery or something. So, but most people range of motion is fine. We can go on to the next thing. The next thing is swelling. So just looking down your knees, does one knee look more swollen than the other? If so, that's going to impact your ability to run, to jump, to do daily tasks because you have swelling in there. Your knee's not stable, and most importantly, your muscles can't engage the way they used to because that swelling's impeding that signal. Your brain's trying to keep you safe, right? So you're not going to do a full contraction if you have much swelling in there. So we got to get that swelling down, and we can talk about that in a bit too. So swelling, range of motion, and then just like flexing your quad. So squeezing your thigh muscle, flexing your quad. Can you do the same side to side? If you can do all those four things, great. Like you're done with phase one, you can start doing the next stuff, right? But those four things are absolutely critical, and you'd be shocked how many people can't do those things when I first meet them, whether they've had surgery or not. It's just those are the basics. They don't know what to look for, so I don't blame them. It's like me bringing my car into the shop. I have no idea what's going on. Like I know there's a noise in the back. I don't know if it's
Yeah.
even some of the turns. It's like sure, whatever. Like I just don't know cars, and some people just don't know their body, and that's totally fine. That's why we're here to help them. It's kind of like someone coming in, they don't know how to squat or do a push up for you. It's like, all right, we're starting at the very basics. We cannot bench press and do heavy back squats until you learn the basics. So that's like phase 1. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Just kind of foundational. All right, we got this. Cool. Okay, so most people can do that stuff. Now, phase 2 is, and I call them phases because people like when you name stuff, right? Phase 2 is we probably need to get you stronger, right? Because most people just aren't strong enough, and strength training is an easy way to decrease pain and get you to level up again, more than higher level activities, which is in phase 3. So phase 2, I usually start with isometrics, and most people listening to this know what isometrics are. If you don't, isometrics, you're just holding position, you're doing work, but you're not going anywhere. So think of like a wall sit. If you do a wall sit, you're working, but you're not going anywhere. Isometrics are awesome because they decrease pain. They're very safe to do. You can do them anywhere. And what most people mess up is like you can actually make them super challenging. So most people think, or like a plank. Most people have done planks. They do a 30-second plank, super tired. Well, it's an easy way to challenge someone when they're hurt because they're not moving. So we're taking away a big variable, which is movement throughout exercise. And we're just holding position. And the nice part is, let's say you hurt your knee and it hurts a squat. Well, you can do a wall sit above the position that's hurting. So maybe you're at like a 60-degree knee angle, and you can get your body to trust itself in that position. Because again, I'm going to keep saying this, the brain likes safety. So if you can teach your body to be safe in a position, then it's going to trust you again. Okay, I can go lower. Okay, I can do a full squat. I trust you. We can go. Your brain doesn't care about performance. You have to teach it that, hey, this is safe to do in order to perform at a high level. So phase 2, it's usually, let's get strength training. We usually start with isometrics because they're easy to start. Once you prove to me you do isometrics, then we do full range of motion strength training. There's a ton that goes into that. But that's kind of the basic, hey, you can start doing this stuff at home. Let's really work on strength training to get that knee better. So that's phase 2 in a nutshell. And then we go to phase 3, and that's getting you back to your sport. So you want to get back to running. Right? You want to run again next week. So you have to do some higher velocity type stuff to get you to prepare for running. Because let's say, for example, you can't jump up and down on 1 foot 10 times in a row. How are you supposed to go on a run? Like, think about the demands of those two. You can't do the simple thing. Like, you're probably not going to be able to do the complex thing. So this is where plyometrics, sprint drills, med ball tosses, full range of motion strength training, still doing. You still do isometrics, still make sure that knee looks good. All of that carries over into phase 3. Let's start doing that stuff. And then we can, let's talk about running. Let's see what you can do. Maybe we'll do like a walk run program. Maybe we'll do a shorter run than you're used to. Maybe we'll do some sprints instead of these longer runs, and then progress from there. So those are kind of the 3 phases I break up the rehab process in, where it's like, okay, let's make sure the knee's okay. Let's fix the knee, and then let's strength train. So let's fix the leg, and then let's fix the body. And once those 3 things all go, then you'd be surprised how quickly you go through those. And it's like, oh, when I go back to my run, I actually feel a lot better instead of, my body performs better instead of I feel better, but my body's actually worse because I took 2 weeks off.
Yeah. So of all the type of injuries that you see, and I'm sure you get high school kids, weekend warriors, moms, dads, I'm sure you see a lot, but of all the different types of injuries that you see, what is probably the most common injuries that you see of patients that you see?
Yeah. So when I was working in clinic, I saw a decent amount of post-surgical and non-surgical. And so the post-surgical, they just had surgery. They're trying to recover to get back to what they're doing. Those surgeries were kind of a good mix of acute injuries and chronic injuries. So like a total knee replacement is more of like a chronic injury, and that's why you have your knee replaced. An ACL tear is more of like an acute injury, and then you have surgery to replace that. For the non-surgical, it was more of the chronic issue. Like, hey, my knee's been hurting for a long time, or I had an acute injury a long time ago, and now it's just like still bothering me. And then you get a handful of, I sprained my ankle last week, or I hurt my shoulder painting my garage last week. What do I do? So decent mix. Now that I'm virtual, I focus a lot on chronic injuries because that's usually a bigger pain point for people, and they're ready to take action. Like, hey, this has been bothering me for like 2 years. I need to do something about it, or I want to avoid surgery.
Yeah.
Problem is, people wait too long to, and I'm sure you
Yeah.
see this too. It's like, when did you get hurt? It's like, oh, like 2 years ago. It's like, what have you been
Yeah.
doing for 2 years? You know?
Yeah. Yeah. That's me in a nutshell right there. So, all right. So that brings me to another question here. All right.
Sure,
So
sure.
I would imagine, and I'm very confident that 90 to 95% of the listeners of our podcast are strength and conditioning coaches, and many of them, probably 95% of them, were former athletes themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So can you talk about all the reps of squats and deadlifts and cleans and the miles and miles and miles of running that we've done on these knees? Was all of that work bad? And is it something that we should continue to do or can do if we take better care of ourselves?
Absolutely. So that goes down to kind of facts versus beliefs. If you believe running's bad for you, I can show you all the research in the world, all the anecdotes. You're probably not going to change your mind, right? If you believe
Yeah,
it's good for you, and I have all these facts, like actually you shouldn't be doing this, or I have all these case studies. It's really hard to overcome people's beliefs, and we see this a lot with running and knee injuries, especially when we're talking about arthritis. So people think if you run too much, it's bad for your knees, and you're going to develop arthritis in your knees. Now, the crazy thing is, people automatically associate arthritis with pain or arthritis with having your knees replaced. Just because you have arthritis in your knees doesn't mean you should have pain. And just because or even a meniscus tear, we're going to put those in the same category.
yeah,
Because just because you have a meniscus tear doesn't mean you should have pain. And just because you have a meniscus tear doesn't mean you're going to need surgery, right? And now the research shows that just because you have arthritis, or no, if you do like a moderate amount of running, you're not going to have an increased amount of arthritis later on in life. Like, it's actually good for the joints to be moving like that. So we get into problems with kind of, most people think things are linear, like more is worse or more is bad. Like, you overdo stuff's bad. And a lot of things are kind of like U-shaped, where like too little, it's kind of Goldilocks, right? Too little
yeah.
isn't good, too much probably isn't great. Now, the too much part, whether we're talking about squatting or running or anything, it's because it goes back to the principle I've been talking about. Your body wasn't ready for the level of demand that you put it on, or it was artificially put there. If we're going to talk about weightlifting and squats and we're talking about steroids, to artificially put your body in a position to handle it at the time, but long term, it wasn't ready for it. So a lot of people, it's like, let's do this U-shaped thing, right? And if you want that U-shape to change, so what's a lot for you might be a little for someone else, you need to get your body into a better place to handle that stuff. And you always kind of want to stay, for the most part, like in the middle of demands. Like, you don't want to be doing too little. Think about the days where, I love college football. Like, I love it as much. I mean, down south, I know it's almost a religion, but if I sit on the couch and watch 12 hours of college football in a row, like, I do not feel good at the end of the day, right? And I'm sure you've done
And
that too, where
eating.
it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, and right, and it's not celery and
No.
chicken and asparagus, right? It's pizza and Doritos and that kind of stuff. So if I do too little, like, I feel terrible, right? And on the same time, uh, if I go to, Minnesota State Fair, if you go to Disneyland or whatever, you can just walk all day. You're walking like 12, 14 hours. Like, you're probably not going to be feeling great at the end of that too, right? It's good to push yourself. But again, how are we in the middle a lot of the times of what our body can handle? And if we're not happy what the middle is, how do we level our body up to make that middle a higher level compared to others?
Um, so there are practitioners. And coaches that say they're going to vaccinate their teams from injury by performing, injury risk screenings, prehab exercises, muscle activation techniques, corrective exercise, proprioception work, on unbalanced or unstable surfaces, balance training. Are we wasting our time with these type of activities? And is more high force, high velocity, and isometric work required? Like, where is the balance between all of the fancy stuff that you see and just good hardcore weight training? Where's that balance lie? And have we been wasting our time for so many years?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it'd be easy for me to say, like, here's the answer. And as humans, when we come to the body, like, the body is absolutely complex. Like, we can't even make a robot to mimic, like, I don't even know, one hundredth of what the body can do, right? So
Mm-hmm.
to sit here and think we know we have all the answers, like, it's just flawed, right? We're just not. And most people, I really dislike when like a pro athlete gets hurt on TV, and people use that as an example for why you should or shouldn't do something. Because one, you don't know everything about that athlete. Like, you've never worked with them. You don't know what their fatigue level was, their stress level was, what their training regimen's like, what their nutrition's like, what their genetics are like. There's so many different factors like you just don't know. Um, Now we think we have some idea of things that can help us, right? So whether we are looking at, what is your uh, how much force can you produce? How fast can you move? What's your mobility like? What's your balance? All of those things matter, right? Now, there's times where that pendulum's going to swing, where we're going to go, all right, we're going to do everything high velocity, right? And then it swings all the way back. It's like, oh, we're going to do only isometrics. And with a lot of things, like, the extremes probably aren't always the best, right? So
Right.
when you're looking at your workout program, the most amount of energy should go onto the things that have the highest return on investment, right? So for what I think that is, are you sprinting? Are you doing plyometrics? Are you doing some med ball work? Are you doing some squats, some deadlifts, some lunge? And we're talking lower body, like squats, deadlifts, lunges. Are you doing all that stuff? Great. That is like, if we're going to use like an eating example, like, you're eating your meat and potatoes. Like, if you're not eating meat and potatoes, you're probably not having the right nutrition. You're not having uh, you're having a lot of empty calories, right? So the other stuff is important too. So the mobility work, stretching, foam rolling, recovery, all that stuff, balance, proprioception, that stuff matters. But, like, those are your like your appetizers, right? Those are your your side salad, things like that. You still need to eat it. But if that's if you have 50 mozzarella sticks for dinner, probably not the best meal ever. Even though mozzarella sticks are great. So it comes down, and those things are going to change, right? The more
Yeah.
we know, the more, oh, this idea makes sense, I've never heard of this. Like, it's going to be evolving. It's not set in stone, like, this is the perfect program. The other hard part is, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this. Every athlete is a little bit different from the one before. So some of them can tolerate sprinting 3 times a week. Some of them can tolerate it once a week. So then you have to make it individual, and that makes it's just really hard, because you can't just put out this template of everyone follow this. You have to, okay, how does your body respond to this, and why? How can we make some of the changes? Um, yeah,
Yeah, I believe, wholeheartedly in that. And that is, there's more technology available today than there's ever been, ever in athletics. And I think sometimes as coaches, we get caught up in these KPIs for different sports or different positions when you can jump the same individual 5 times in a row on a force plate and they're going to look, they could look in many instances completely different. And so there's a lot, I think, that goes into making an athlete successful. Number one is their DNA. And as coaches and practitioners, the one thing that we can't change, as far as I know, we can't change their DNA. I guess there are people who are experimenting with DNA doping right now, gene doping as we speak. But I know that every athlete is totally different in what, and I found that what one man or woman responds to a person that looks almost identical, that has the same level of success as them, responds completely different to a similar stimulus. And so there's a lot that is a true statement. There's a lot that goes into making an athlete great, and every one of them are completely different. Everyone and every team that I ever coached was completely different. So what we did one year, if we tried to implement a similar program, rubber stamping it, it's going to have a completely different response. Because of what that team A went through to get to where they were. Team B, you just can't take the program that you used in year 4 of an athlete and rubber stamp it and have an athlete do it in year 2 and expect similar outcomes. It just doesn't work like that, or it never worked like that for me. And, and I used to sit down when I was writing programs for the winter. I would sit and, do a needs analysis and think about, different positions on the team and different personnel, and say that, gosh, why can't I just do what we did last year? It worked. But this year's team was completely different than last year's team. And I would sit there and painstakingly redo a program every year because every team is different. And now the template, if you looked at it, would look similar, but
Right.
by the time it was, it looked similar, but by the time you hit the workout floor, it was so many different variables that were involved in it. It was always different. And so, you're correct.
It's so frustrating. It's like, I know this works, but it's not working for this person or these people. So I have to do, and especially like people always ask, like, what's the best exercise for my knee? It's like, well, these are like 3 I think that are the best. But guess what? Like, if you don't tolerate it, you don't like it, you don't have equipment, you can't load it well, then we have to do something that I think is suboptimal, but might be better for that person. And then that's hard for me because I know you're not doing what I think is best based on my biases and experiences.
Right.
Now I'm giving you something suboptimal. But if you get better results from it, like, that's winning, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that is correct. So you mentioned cortisone and steroids a couple of times, and for a lot of people, and I've had people say, all I need is a steroid, all I need is a shot and I'll be better. And I can, in some instances, I could see where that might benefit, someone short term. But with these, I feel like you're only treating the symptoms and not actually the cause of the pain or inflammation. So, as an alternative to these injections, in addition to an aggressive rehab program for tendons and ligaments and cartilage, meniscus injuries, were there ever any biologics or things that you're aware of that you would recommend, and why or why not?
Yeah, so I always wonder when we're talking about injections, steroids, biologics, if usually like the doctor that's giving them, if they weren't reimbursed for doing it, would they give as many? The answer is
Mm,
probably no, right? So
yeah.
there's always a financial bias implicate, and obviously, like we all do things that financially help us, right? So it's not necessarily a bad thing, but like, are we just doing cortisone shots because it takes 5 minutes and you get reimbursed $100 or whatever for it? And I always kind of wonder on that. Again, human body super complex. When you start trying, I have to be really careful here. So if you're gonna give a cortisone shot, you're thinking very short term, right? Because the
Hmm.
research isn't great on cortisone shots. And I am very biased because I see people in therapy who have had cortisone shots and they like quote didn't work or only lasted 2 weeks. Obviously, they're gonna go seek therapy more than someone who saw a lot of relief from a shot. But the research doesn't back up like cortisone as a great long-term option for a lot of different injuries either. People ask about like PRP injections a lot too. Now, if you
Oh
get a
yeah.
PRP, yeah, so that's very common. Like, hey, will PRP help this? Now, if you're someone who gets one and you respond well to it, you're going to tell a lot of people this was great, this was awesome. And if we're gonna rank everything, like one is exercise and 100 is surgery, like PRP is gonna come before surgery, right? Like it's just
Yeah.
less invasive, it's less recovery time. So it's like everything is on the table. It's just like where on the table are we gonna rank these things? So if you want to get PRP before having a surgery, like yeah, like I think that would make sense. Problem like PRP, the research isn't great on it, and it's very expensive. It's usually out of pocket. It kind of depends where you get it. I've heard like the
Mhm.
$1,500 to $2,000 number for it, so it's very
Wow.
expensive. Out of pocket something that isn't like life changing. Like depends what research you look at, but overall, like doesn't really help long term with a lot of the injuries that I see. So when you're asking the questions like, should I get a cortisone shot? Should I get a PRP injection? It comes down to like risk reward, like how much time, money, energy, effort you can put into this. What's the expected reward? If it doesn't work, how are you going to feel? Have you tried the things higher up on the table? Have you tried exercise? Have you tried this, that, or the other thing? Or are you just doing that because your doctor told you to, and it seems like an easy option? Um, so when I talk about these things, again, everything's on the table because I get it. Some people end up having surgery. It's not the end of the world. It's not ideal. We want to avoid
Yeah.
it. But if you have surgery, then we go back to the front of the table. Let's do everything we can to avoid a second surgery
Yeah.
and a third surgery and a fourth. Because I know you've seen
Yeah.
that plenty of times where one leads to two, leads to three to four. That's a
Yeah.
that's a tough road to go down,
Yeah.
especially if you're trying to get back to high level anything.
Yeah. Yeah. I know personally from personal experience that
Mm-hmm.
a steroid shot works for me immediately, almost immediately.
Yeah.
But then it wears off in like 3 weeks and you're right back where you started.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And whereas if it's a minor procedure, you could have already had it done and started your rehab program and be on the way to recovery. And so that's where I fall because I've never, ever gotten a steroid shot injection. And I'm telling you, I've been aggressive. Okay. I've never gotten a steroid injection in a thumb or a knee or a shoulder, and in 2 months it not start hurting again without more serious interventions required. So it's a short-term gain. Now, if you're in the middle of a prepper, let's say I'm a power lifter or a weightlifter,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm in the middle of some intense preparation for a meet and I strain something, and the doctor says, well, you can slow your training down in rehab and risk not being able to compete, or you can take this injection and continue to train compete and then we'll fix it after. I can understand that. Okay.
Right.
Like you were saying, like for a professional athlete, a guy that's getting paid 10 million a week to play a sport, he's going to find every means available to compete, because if he doesn't get paid. So I can understand that.
Yeah.
All right. So let me ask you this question. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just to add, we see parents who think their 14-year-old kids are
Oh,
not
yeah.
the same level, and it's like they have a game Saturday. It's like 10 years from now, you're not going to remember this game. Like, this game
Yeah.
doesn't matter in the big
Yeah.
picture. And you've already started this process of, I want a quick fix, right? And most people get a cortisone shot because they think they have inflammation in their shoulder or their knee. Well, why is the inflammation there? Why is the injury there? Why is the pain there? And again, so many times, get a shot, 3 weeks later, it all comes back. You didn't really fix the problem. Like, you took the batteries out of the smoke detector. Like, you didn't go fix the fire. So
Yeah.
now there are times where people, like, when they combine things, and this is where I'm always like, okay, like, it worked. You do your rehab and you get the shot and you get a lot better and you fix your strength and you fix the problem. Sometimes people get the shot and it pushes them over the edge. Again, when we're looking at the table, like, exercises at the front or the line, I guess, and not really the table. I don't know.
Yeah.
Sitting at a table, that's why I'm using it. And the surgery's in the back. Yeah, like, I guess a shot is better than surgery. But did you do everything possible before considering a shot? And
Yeah.
for 99.9% of people, the answer is no.
Yeah.
I went to therapy 3 times. Great. Okay.
Yeah.
You went to one therapist 3 times. Like,
Yeah.
how about go to 3 therapists for 3 months each, or
Right.
2 or 1 therapist for a year? Like, what are we doing?
Fix it. Yeah. So it never comes back.
Yeah. And it's hard because
All right.
pain is
Yeah.
multifactorial. It's not always mechanical where it's like, you're weak, you need to get stronger. It's not always that simple. And that's what keeps therapists up at night, because I believe in getting people strong and active and healthy as much as possible. And sometimes they're still in pain. And it's just like, what do we do? What are we missing? So this stuff isn't easy. It's never easy. It's never simple. But again, are we exhausting all of the options that have a high ROI? Exercise, there's a million benefits, very little risk. Are we exhausting that completely? If so, then let's talk about the other stuff. Most people just don't ever get to that point.
Right. And in high level athletics, not a lot of people have enough patience to do that either, because of time. You have to make time, and then you have to program that. And, I've had some really good assistant coaches in my time that were good about that, where, if a young man or young lady performed a particular movement or skill and said, ooh, that didn't feel right. Well, the first thing that we would do is tell them, let's go see the sports medicine people. And, or let's try something different and see if that bothers you. And sure enough, 9 times out of 10, by trying something different and then going to see the athletic trainers, we were able to help them. And, if you walked in our weight room, again, we can go back to the template. If you walked in our weight room and there were 25 guys working out, if at first glance you would say they're all doing the same thing, but there were really most of the time there could be 20 to 25 different programs going on based on what each person's strengths, weaknesses, and injury status was. And when you have, a well-trained, well-developed staff, well-experienced staff, you can do that. Whereas in some instances, if you're one strength coach and there's 750 or 650 athletes, that's a little tougher to do. It's not tougher, but it just requires more preparation and more education and communication to the people that you're training. But yeah, you can get it done. And that, again, that's why I wanted you on here, because that's the message that I want to send out, that, you have to do due diligence regardless of what the injury, whether it's muscle, tendon, ligament, meniscus, or cartilage or bone, you have to do due diligence to make sure that you're handling all that. So yeah, I don't want to regress too much, but whenever I sat in a football meeting and the athletic trainers, and it's a position coach and a head coach's worst 10 minutes of a staff meeting is when the trainer came in and went over the injury report, because, our meetings were first thing in the morning. And from the time practice was over until we had that morning meeting, generally, the coaches were all watching practice film and game film and preparing for the next practice. And the head coach had an unlimited number of things that he was working on. And then the trainers and the strength and conditioning staff were trying to get the guys ready for the next day. So the trainer would have 12 hours sometimes or less, 8 hours maybe, from the time practice was over until he had to report to the head coach. And so I broke our injury report down by body part, and it was joint. So it would go head and neck, shoulders, elbows, wrist, hand, upper spine, lower spine, hips, knees, ankles, and feet. And so I just did it while he's going over the injury report. And then I broke it down by tissue, muscle, tendon, ligament, connect, cartilage and bone. And then I would say non-contact or contact. And I would sit there and do these little hash marks while the trainer was going through the injury report. And that gave me a better idea of what the injuries were. If we had a lot of soft tissue injuries, I thought that was from overwork. If we had, tendons or ligaments and bone injuries, that was because of contact. And so I always tried to break that injury report down to find out the cause, not the young man or young woman is injured. I can't do anything about that right now. Let's figure out why they're happening. And I would always do that every staff meeting, and everybody else would be, like, well, how did that happen? What are we doing? And I would just be sitting there calmly, just trying to figure it out. So that's how I occupied my time during the worst part of any staff meeting when you're working, at the collegiate level. Because if you tell a coach that a kid is out, sometimes you'd have to change your entire game plan because one player is missing from the game, or throw out 3 or 4 plays that you felt were going to give you an opportunity to win a game. So sorry about that regression. All right, let me ask you this.
No, I have a question for you based on that.
Okay, good.
It's easy for me to say, like, you can't go play until you can do these things. Like, the athlete and the coach probably don't want to hear that. They just want to go play, right? Especially it's like, hey, we got, we play Florida on Saturday. Like, we need this.
Yeah. Dead man's got to walk. If you're playing Florida.
We need everybody.
Yeah, dead man's got to walk.
We want to win by a lot. How do you balance, like, trainer and head coach, which they're not like in conflict, they just have like different priorities, without losing the trust of the athlete? Because you want the athlete telling you what's going on. You don't want them hiding stuff, but you have to respect what the doctor or the trainer is saying, or the therapist. And also the coach just like needs to know, like, who's playing, who do I have, and like, can they play? How did you like because that's where it becomes that's a higher level task. Like, how would you do that?
Okay, so I'm glad you asked that, and that was the reason why I wanted you on here. Okay, because there it's a delicate balance. First of all, the Hippocratic Oath is, everyone should know that, and it's to do no harm. Okay. So that should be first and foremost in every medical person and anyone in this field's mind when you're making these type of decisions. And I was fortunate, again, to be around some aggressive people and highly motivated athletes. Now, some athletes, they'd get a hangnail and they're out for 3 weeks. And those guys generally never reached high level success unless it was at a position that did not require a certain amount of mental and physical and emotional toughness. And that's just a fact. You're tougher physically and mentally, tougher people were able to play with discomfort better than someone else. And there's a difference between discomfort and injury. So most of the time, the people that I worked with and worked for would say, we're going to tape him up. We're going to rehab. We've already started rehab. You know, he's in the training room now. We met every day, me and athletic trainers. We didn't meet every day. We talked every 30 minutes. About these type of instances and what they did for them and what they were going to do for me. And then you just wait and see. The first thing was to always go non-weight bearing until you assess the injury and then immediately start range of motion. So it was non-weight bearing until you could figure it out. And then there's certain injuries, there's a difference between a lateral ankle sprain and a high ankle sprain, so naturally that the lateral ankle sprain, you can brace it and you can tape it and brace it and work around that. But a high ankle sprain was a little more difficult because of the type of injury it is. Immobilize it till you figured out what was wrong, because a lot of times you're out in the middle of practice or you're at an away game and a kid's ankle blows up. So they would put it in a boot and then have the kid stand on the sideline or sit on the bench and just wait until you could get them after the game or get back to Baton Rouge and check it out. And then again, immediately start range of motion. And then the trainer would report to the head coach, well, coach, he's weight bearing right now. He's walking around the training room. We're going to put him on the Ultra G and have him walk and see if he can jog. And you would try that. And if that worked, oh, great. And then you would do a little bit more and you would immediately start trying to strengthen it, whether it was a hand, wrist, elbow, shoulder, or whatever. And then just work through that as the week goes. Now, I worked for some coaches that said, if they can't practice by Wednesday, he is out. And then I've worked for other coaches that said, if he can't practice by Thursday, we're going to take him out of the game plan. And then depending on who that individual was, I've seen guys come out on Friday and do the walkthrough, because Friday's practice was always very low key, and do the walkthrough and be ginger, kind of moving gingerly. And then the coach says, we're going to make a game time decision. And I've seen kids warm up and go through pregame and they've got, all the emotions and the adrenaline flowing and go out and ball out and not had done anything that week. And then I've seen other guys that had worked really hard to come back and then go through pregame and say, coach, I can't do it. I just can't. I thought I was going to be able to, like an AC sprain for an offensive or defensive lineman. That's tough because you're punching and you're taking contact on it, and you can guard that AC joint all you want during a week of practice. But in the game, as an offensive or defensive lineman, you're going to have to strike people. So it was different, just like we've been talking about, it's different for everyone. And then, we've had guys that swell really, really bad initially, and then it be meaningless. And then you have guys that don't swell at all, and they
Right.
can't put weight on it for 3 or 4 days. So it's different for everyone. And then it all goes back to the Hippocratic Oath, do no harm. And let's just tape it up and see how he does. Without tape, I don't know how some people get through the sports, So, for instance, when I was in college, I hyperextended my left thumb multiple times. And so what I started doing, so my dad worked for Wilson Sporting Goods. He was a product engineer and so they would take products, they would develop these pieces of athletic equipment. And then my dad's job was to build the manufacturing line to make products, whether they were carry bags or golf bags or baseball gloves or footballs, whatever it was, the product engineers would develop the products, and then my dad developed the production line to manufacture it. So I had all types of stuff as a kid growing up. I had one of everything that Wilson ever manufactured, one boxing glove, one this, one that. Well, my dad brought home a hockey glove. They had some issue with the manufacturing process of a hockey glove. And I'd never and you're from Minnesota, so you probably know what a hockey glove is. But one of the things that I found intriguing about a hockey glove was that there was a web between your thumb and your index finger to keep from your thumb becoming hyperextended, because you have that stick. And when you check each other's sticks, you would obviously hyperextend the thumb because there was a brace built in the back of the glove. And then there was a web between the thumb and the index finger to keep it from being bent back. So I kept hurting my thumb multiple times. And so my dad said, I was on the phone with my dad, and my dad says, you got to tape it up like the hockey glove. And I was like, what do you mean? He goes, well, just find a way to connect some tape. So what I would do is I would take the finger tape and I would tape it right here. And then I would put tape right there, and it immediately stopped my thumb from hyperextending. So now, and this brings me to my next question here in a minute. So I went to the doctor. It got so bad, last year that it hurt all the time. So I went in, and the doctor gave me a cortisone shot there. So for 2 months, it didn't hurt at all. I was like, oh man, my thumb's better. And then in 2 months, the pain came right back. So what I'm doing now, I've been putting Voltaren gel on it, and that seems to help. But the doctor told me you're going to have surgery on that because of, multiple injuries to that joint. And he goes, you're going to be fine, but you got to have surgery. So right now in the interim, I'm putting Voltaren gel on it, and it helps. But again, my dad came up with a solution, and that's what you try to do to keep guys on the field. I've seen our equipment managers and our athletic trainers in the equipment room or in the training room with pieces of equipment, whether it be shoes, and guys that had bad feet, because Nike builds their shoes, and I'm not knocking Nike, but Nike builds their shoes, especially for wide receivers and DBs, because shoes today for collegiate and professional sports are manufactured based on the weight and the position of the player. So a wide receiver's shoe is extremely light, and the soles are very rigid, whereas an offensive lineman's shoes are very heavy and they're built up, to protect your ankles from people falling on them. And sometimes those shoes aren't comfortable or require more support. And I have seen our equipment managers and our athletic trainers with kids cutting and drilling and screwing stuff to gear to try to find a way for this young man to play pain-free. And it's like that in all sports. So I got kind of long-winded there. But so this leads me to a question I have. Can you give us some situations where you feel like surgery is warranted?
Yeah. So going back to a lot of surgery is timeline, right? Like, hey, I'm a junior in high school and I want to play my senior year. Like that is a factor in it, right? Or hey,
Hmm.
I have, if you're like an adult, like, hey, like I'm gonna have a kid soon. I want to get this taken care of, and like nothing's really helped. Like a lot of it's like timeline force, and it's okay, understandable, right? When we're talking about like knee injuries, if we're talking about like an ACL or a meniscus, there are times where like your knee just isn't stable, or if you have a meniscus tear and the flap flips over and your knee catches and
Yeah, it's
locks,
locked.
and
Yeah.
it's then it's like, okay, like maybe there's actually something structurally uh, so significant that it does need surgery. And we're all human beings, right? So
Yeah.
if you've been in pain for 6 weeks or 6 months and you just can't take it anymore, then okay, we've exhausted all options. Like, let's talk about this and see if you're appropriate. So it's not that surgery is evil or bad or unnecessary ever. It's just that it's last in the line of things we want to do, because people think surgery is going to fix the problem. And it's like, yes, surgery changes the anatomical structure that was affected.
Hmm.
But what most people don't understand is there's all these functional deficits that you probably have that you need to improve on: strength, range of motion, swelling, all of that stuff. Also, when you start looking at some of these outcomes of surgeries in terms of their success rate, in terms of how do people feel a year later, 2 years later, 5 years later, 10 years later, like it's a little concerning.
Hmm.
It's not a slam dunk 100% fixes my problem. So if you're gonna have, and then if you look at the complications of surgery, like we're talking about infection, we're talking about uh, you know having a second surgery, we're talking about a lot of bad things can happen after a surgery, right? Um, so you put all those together, it's like, yeah, this is like last resort, right? Like, why would we ever choose this if we didn't have to? And again, when people are like, "Oh, I had a surgery. Am I like done? Did I mess up?" It's like, no, 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 no. You had your surgery. Hindsight, maybe you needed it, but let's avoid that second surgery. Let's avoid the third one and the fourth one, because that's when it really spirals and goes
Hmm.
downhill and plays on your psyche a lot. So there
Yeah.
are times where I understand, like, yeah, like you might have needed this, or there are situations where this is the best option for you.
Yeah.
But did you exhaust everything else first? Does it make sense with like your risk reward factor, your timeline? And if so, then let's go. And the hard part is we're not going to know if it was the best option. Like, we're going to play the hindsight 2020 game. Oh, I
Right.
should have had surgery. Oh, I shouldn't have had surgery, because we're all N of one, right? And it's hard. It's hard to know, like, did I do the right thing? Did I not do the right thing? I've experienced and seen so many instances where we could avoid surgery. And if we can, then that's so much better for the human being, for the person, and for the athlete.
All right. So so I'm going to run you through a gauntlet here because we're running out of time. I could talk all day. I don't know what your day looks like, but
I I I blocked my whole day for this. I was pumped.
okay.
I love when people
Don't
I
say
love when
that. No.
I just love talking about this stuff, because
Yeah.
when you, and I use Google as an example now, like you just can't always like find this stuff easily on Google.
Yeah.
It's like
Right.
you gotta talk to people who have been, or like the stories that you bring up. I can't just go on Google and like find this stuff. Like, oh,
Yeah.
what was it like? In 2019 we had all these studs at LSU.
Yeah.
Or what
It
was it
was
like?
good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
forget knee pain. Let's talk Joe
Yeah.
Verda, Justin Jefferson.
Yeah.
Or what was strength and conditioning like, 20 years ago? Like, what did that
Yeah.
look? Those kind of stories and stuff. That's why
Yeah.
like, doing podcasts and stuff are great.
Yeah.
But our listeners are probably, God, these guys are
Yeah.
still talking. So let's do this gauntlet idea.
Yeah, yeah. So I love it too, man. That's why I do the podcast. This part of my job, I enjoyed everything, the games, watching Justin Jefferson, run past guys and make these miraculous catches and all that. All that stuff was good. But the thing that I miss more than anything is my staff and talking training.
Yeah.
And we would do this for hours and hours and hours. And I think I probably enjoyed it more than they did sometimes. But whether it had to do with food, I mean, seriously, if it had anything to do with food, music, or training, we were good for hours and hours and hours. We could occupy. Some people talk about the downtime of collegiate strength and conditioning can be mind numbing. But, we were either working out, talking about food, talking about music, or talking training. So we never had a problem, or doing some stupid challenge in the weight room. We would find a way to occupy our time. So so I'm going to run you through this gauntlet of stuff because I got a lot of questions I want to ask you about certain things. And then when we're through, you may have a couple of things that you want to talk about. But the first thing I want to talk about is cryotherapy and whether or not it's used for recovery or a modality for pain or therapy. Is cryotherapy, what is your opinion on cryotherapy?
Yeah, so it goes back to the question, is this leveling your body up to meet the demands of the task that you expose it to and might have gotten hurt from? I don't think it does that. So it doesn't really fall in my philosophy of like, you should do this to help. Now, there are situations when you come out of surgery and you're in 10 out of 10 pain and you don't want to take pain meds. Yeah, I'd probably advise icing over pain meds or, other factors. Or again, these kind of more extreme examples, you have something super important. You're taking the performance aspect more than the health. Yeah. Or another great example, you have a 6-year-old kid and he falls really hard and just slams his knee into the ground and he's crying and he's just screaming and he just can't do anything. Okay, put ice pack on him for 10 minutes. Like, it's going to be okay. The problem is when you think the ice is leveling your body up to meet the demands of the task, then that's what, or you just consistently do it. It's part of your routine all the time, and you're not doing your rehab, you're not doing your strengthening, you're not going on your walks, you're not doing your exercises. That's when we have the problem. So it's really an opportunity cost. If you're doing all that other stuff, you're doing your best, and you're still in a lot of pain, like, I get it. I get it at times when people use it, right? But when people mistake it for this is healing me, this is going to level me up to get back to what I want to do, then it's like, how's it doing that? The other thing with ice too, I don't know if you're familiar with Gary Reinl. He had a really good. I've had him on my podcast. He has a really good one with Eric Cressy. He talks about like ice. It's like, okay, let's say you have a lateral ankle sprain, and I completely separate my shoulder. Two very different injuries, two different body parts. We're both going to use the same size ice pack at the same temperature for the same amount of time at the same, like, when you look at the actual details, it's like this kind of doesn't really make sense. It's like you and I are both going to squat 400 pounds today. It's like, well, I don't like, what if it's like, there's a lot of factors and go to how much weight you use. And like, so with ice, there's a lot of like inconsistence. I get why people use it. And there are times where it's like, okay, like, I'm not going to argue you. But if your why is misconstrued, then I'll probably debate you on that because, again, I want people to play sports as much as possible. I love sports. Like, I play basketball twice a week. I like to work out. I started golfing recently. Like, I've run a marathon. Like, I love sports, and I want people to play sports. So let's do the best things we can to allow people to do that as long as they want to.
Yeah. Okay, good. All right. What about vibrational therapy? Like the Theraguns that you would see people just doing on their legs. Beneficial or not?
So Theragun, foam rolling, massage. If they help you, and again, it's opportunity cost. How long are you doing it? How much time are you putting into it? How much money you're putting in it? That kind of stuff. If you do it, you feel better and allows you to do stuff, great, right? If you're doing it because it looks cool and you spend an hour doing it and you don't really get benefit from it, it's like, what are we actually doing? So I think small amounts of it make a lot of sense. If you use a Theragun, you use a foam roll, if you have someone massage, if you just massage it yourself, I think all of it is pretty similar. the Theragun looks cool. That's why people like, let's be honest, it looks cool,
Yeah.
right? Oh, like watching an NBA game and LeBron's doing it on the bench. Like, yeah, I want to be like LeBron. But if you get a $5 foam roller and do the same thing for 2 minutes, you probably get the same effect. So massage is such a weird thing because you can't, like, if you're getting massage, like if we're looking at studies, right, and we're trying to compare massage to other interventions, like you can't really be a blind subject because you always know when massage is being applied to you, right?
Right.
So like you, like other things, like if you take, like when people talk about like double blind studies, like,
Right.
oh, you take a pill and the pill's actually like nothing, it's just sugar, right? But massage, like you always kind of know.
Good
It's like you
point.
can't.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I always kind of like, and everyone's like, some people like physical touch and other people don't. So it's like you're gonna respond differently. Again, it kind of goes back to like my plate example. It's on your plate, but like it's not the steak and potatoes. So just
Yeah.
don't mess them up, and you'll probably be okay.
All right. Got another one. Ultrasound. I got some good ones now. You're going to get tired here. So be careful what you ask for. All right. I'm just going to say, I never felt like ultrasound did me any good. Like I always felt like it was a waste of time. It may work. I don't know. What does it do? Or you can give me the quick answer.
Okay. Ultrasound it's mostly placebo. You think you're getting better because something's being done to you. There is time and place for that. My issue is when providers charge people obscene amount of money for a placebo effect. It's like, I'm not really, it's like, oh, go outside, run around in a circle 10 times, come back, you'll feel better. It's like, I'm not really doing anything. Like, maybe you feel better. Or like, I use like red versus blue Gatorade. Oh, you have to drink blue Gatorade because it's better. It's like, they're the same thing. So if something's placebo effect and you use it and it feels better, great. But if someone's charging you $250 for 10 minutes of ultrasound, I get really upset at that because it's just a waste. It's opportunity cost, waste of time. We could be doing other stuff that we know is better.
Okay. STIM. First of all, why is it called STIM because it's electrical stimulation, or is it another reason why they call it STEM?
Yeah. Yep. No, it's just shortened. There's like two kinds of you can get way more technical than this. I like keeping things simple. There's basically two types of STIM. There's TENS, which interferes with your pain signals.
Okay.
That's not really effective. And again, it kind of goes back to icing and some of the things we talked about, steroids. It's not really leveling your body up. It's just trying to bring your pain down artificially. And then there's neuromuscular electrical stimulation, which I absolutely love because that's mimicking your muscles contracting.
Like Compex, like a Compex.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So
big believer.
There's situations like after surgery and your brain can't talk to your muscle and you need electricity to stimulate. Great. Also, when you have like a hamstring strain and you're sitting at home resting and you have the stim on to get non-fatiguing muscle contractions going, it's awesome. Like it feels great. Like it really helps, I think, with injuries. Yeah. So when people say stim, which one? If we're on the getting the muscles to contract, great. If we're doing it to artificially stop the pain, probably not in your best interest. Yeah.
Perfect. Awesome. Big believer in Compex. Okay. All right. Kinesio taping.
Again, that's going to be like ultrasound, like it's placebo. It looks cool, right? Like you see on someone's shoulder. Now, again, if you use it and you play better, you feel better, it feels more stable. Like there's very low risk in it, right?
Yeah.
But if you're doing that and you're not doing your exercises, it's an opportunity cost thing. A lot of things come back to opportunity costs, right? If you throw a piece of tape on, you feel better, great. But if you put it on and you don't do any exercises and you're really weak in your shoulder, well, we're not really fixing the problem.
Okay. All right. Here comes one. Red light or low light red or near infrared lighting.
Yeah. So I have seen a lot of good stuff in that. I haven't used it enough to talk about it. Yeah. But I know there's some good research out there and some people in the industry that I follow. they really like to use it. So I can't
Yeah.
speak enough to it, but definitely open the idea that it's helpful.
Yeah. I have, so I believe in that one. All right. So I have a laser right here. So, that I do some stuff with. So I'm a believer. All right. Ultrasound. Oh, I've already asked about ultrasound.
Yeah, don't bring that up again.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Infrared sauna. I've never done it before, but infrared sauna.
Yeah. So I don't know enough of the difference between infrared sauna and then just like your typical wet sauna.
Yeah.
But it does seem like sauna has a ton of benefits for people when you do it. Um, I think it's like Andrew Huberman talks about like 55 minutes a week is kind of the sweet
Yeah.
spot of getting the benefits. So people that use sauna for health and performance, it seems like it's a really good option for people.
Yeah. All right. Now, here's one I never felt confident enough to ask a practitioner this question because I didn't want to get punched in the face. But since you're in Minnesota and I'm in Baton Rouge, I don't have to worry about that. But how does dry needling differ from acupuncture? Isn't it the same thing? And if it
Yeah.
is or not, please explain.
Yeah. So when you step back far enough, like they're the same thing, right? So they're applied. I've never had acupuncture. And I've had dry needling before. It's like, oh, should I learn this to help with my practice? It didn't do anything for me. But they're effectively trying to do the same thing where it's modulating the body's response to pain or stress or other factors.
Mm-hmm.
And again, some people, if you respond to dry needling, you're going to love it and tell everyone about it, right? Research isn't great on it. And again, if we're charging people $150 to put needles in your shoulder and we don't really think it's helping more than giving you exercises, like I'm not really sure what we're doing here. So,
Okay. All right. I
but that could
like it.
change if
Yeah.
research comes out and shows like this is super effective. Like everything is changeable. It goes back to
Mm-hmm.
like principles, philosophies,
Yeah.
um, and and again,
Yeah.
like is this applicable to a large set of people across different spectrums? Then it's great. Let's do it.
Yeah. I think so. I've done it. You know, when you're 60 and you live a life like I have,
Yeah.
you'll just about try anything. So um, I think it's just like anything else. If you have someone that is just sticking you with needles, uh, I've gone to people and it didn't work, and then I've gone to others and it's worked, but it's temporary. It's not something,
Yeah.
and so therefore it could have been a placebo. Um, but I think there are good practitioners and there are bad practitioners, or I wouldn't say bad, but less
Yeah.
experienced practitioners. All right, next one, blood flow restriction.
Yep. So BFR is a great modality to use when you can't weight bear, especially after a surgery. So if you have a meniscus repair and you can't weight bear on that leg and everything about the knee otherwise looks healthy for those first 4 to 6 weeks, you can artificially stress the knee to make it feel like it's under a lot of load by
Mm-hmm.
safely controlling how much blood's going in and out. And it's really helpful in those situations. Now, it doesn't replace normal strength training. So if you are in a healthy person and you're like, I'm giving up strength training, only doing BFR, then you're missing the boat. Hey, so
Yeah,
you'd be surprised what people do, man.
yeah,
I'm sure you've seen as much as I have, or
yeah.
even more. But
Yeah, I've seen
again,
some crazy
time and
stuff.
place in those situations, it's awesome.
Yeah,
And people need to know that because they think, oh, I can't do PT for this. The number one thing that grinds my gears is, well, there's a lot of things too. After surgery, after injury, your rehab starts. Like the clock is starting. The
yeah,
second you have surgery, the second you have an injury. If you're just going to wait 6 weeks because you can't, like, there's a million things you can do with your therapist or with a coach or whatever. If you're just going to sit and wait, like you're falling so far behind. It's going to be hard to come back. So find the things you can do. BFR is one of the things you can do.
Yeah.
Typically, if your doctor approves it and it feels it's safe, obviously, like anything.
Yeah. All right. So last one is so, and you know this, and when you have highly motivated athletes, especially a guy in his junior, senior year when he's thinking about going pro, and they get hurt, it's devastating. Well, it's devastating anytime, but for those that are super motivated, it can be devastating. So one of the things that we found was that by keeping them involved in the strength training program, because their peers are outside practicing, they're working, they're getting ready to play in a game. We found that the more we kept them involved, the better they would be. And then we also found that the harder they worked from the time they were injured until the time they returned to play or until the time they had surgery, the quicker their recovery was following. So if a guy had, let's say, I hyperextended my right elbow, I would train that left arm as hard as I could. I trained above the joint and below the joint as long as it was pain-free. And then I trained the rest of the body as hard as I possibly could without causing any issues with the involved joint. And I remembered a long time ago while I was in college, the theory of cross education that, research shown that when I train an uninvolved joint, the involved joint showed improvements, or it showed less, there were less of an asymmetry had I not done anything at all with the left arm. So I would say to the player, I said, look, right now, your right elbow, you can't do anything with the right elbow. The doctor and the athletic trainer said nothing with the right elbow. So we're going to take this left arm for two reasons. One, because of cross education, research has shown that by working my left arm than my right arm, there's going to be less of an asymmetry once you recover. And then two, when you do recover, instead of having 2 weak arms, you're only going to have one. All right. So now, is cross education, is it real? And what are your thoughts?
Yeah,
or have you ever even heard of it?
Yeah, no, it definitely is something that we see that is helpful for people. It keeps them involved. It keeps the rest of the body trained. It does seem to have an impact on the injured side. So when you have an injury, you still have 3 good limbs. It's one of the best things I've ever learned. I think I first heard that from Eric Cressy. You still have 2 good arms and a good leg if you hurt one of your legs. So keep training those, whether it's a neurological effect, whether it's a hormonal effect, however the body works that way, it's gonna help. And then when you're, I guess a really good analogy for this is there's this show on, I don't know how much you like nature documentaries. There's one on Netflix now called Predators, and they follow this family of cheetahs, and it was lions or cheetahs, I forget which one, but one of the cheetahs, it's going through a drought and they don't have enough food, so one of the younger cheetahs can't keep up with the pack, so the pack leaves it behind, because if they just stay there, they're either gonna get attacked or they're not gonna have enough food, and then they're all gonna die. So, and then I think later the cheetah catches up with them and it's all a happy ending. But that's kind of what you want with your body. You want to keep your body going, and then that injured side can catch up. You don't want to just stay where the injured side is, because you're just going to fall way behind where you were before. Going back to your involvement of the athlete with the team or other people, when I was a senior in high school, it's fall 2009. one of my friends, he tore his ACL. He was quarterback of the team. And we were like decent, like we weren't best friends, but we were like decent friends at the time. And so I went over to his house after surgery, just to see how he was, whatever. Last summer, like I ran into him, and we see each other maybe once every few years or whatever. But like we like went and got coffee or whatever and caught up, and he was like, "Hey," like, and we got talking about sports or injuries or whatever. And he's like, "Hey, like, do you remember when you came over to my house after I tore my ACL?" I'm like, "Yeah, do you?" He's like, "Yeah, like you're like one of like the few people." And this, he was like homecoming king. He's like, "You're like one of the few guys that actually came over and made sure I was okay." So like 14 years later, he remembered that. So when you're hurt, it's really easy to feel isolated because when you're practicing and you have a bad day of practice, it's like, God, I don't want to be here. When you're hurt, you do anything to be back on the field. And no matter, it's so easy to feel isolated. So whether you're the injured athlete or you're working with one or you know somebody, you have to keep them involved as much as possible, because when you're younger, it's really easy for the athlete to be your whole identity as a person, right? Or most of your identity.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it's just
even
it's
when
just
you get old like me.
Yeah, it's just like who you are and what you do and what you love and all your friends do and your siblings do and your and it's like now like you don't know who you are because you're not playing your sport, and that's just a really weird feeling. When people ask like who you are, you usually say your job first, or like, oh, I play the sport. If you don't have that, it's like you don't really know who you are. So there's a lot of psychological stuff that can be going on with the and they're in pain. My sophomore year, I broke my ankle. I was on crutches. Like, you're crutching around school, it's terrible. Or like last year, I hurt my back working out. I missed like 2 days of work. You're just sitting at home. It's like, is this ever gonna get better? There's a lot of challenges going on. So you don't have to coddle people, but just make sure like, hey, we got to keep things as normal as possible, because like if you're on a team, like we need you. Like, we need you to get back. We need you. And as a person, I care about you. So some of that, and it's hard when you work with like high school athletes. You ask like, how you doing? How you doing? Oh, good, fine, good. What? They don't really say much. But sometimes parents will be like, hey, like, he really struggled after surgery and he always liked working with you. And it's like, wow, like I did help him, because you treat them normally, but just make sure they're okay, because it's easy to not be okay after an injury.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. That's perfectly said too, and I appreciate it. And a good point to end it. We've been going for a while, so I appreciate you coming on here very much. And this is the first time that we have spoken, except through text or email. So I appreciate you coming on here. And it was exactly what I anticipated. And I appreciate it because, our audience is very broad. We have weekend warriors. I mean, I talk to people all the time that aren't strength coaches and are not competitive athletes that tune in and listen. So I appreciate you coming on here. I thought you did a great job. And again, it's perfect. Everything that you spoke about was needed. You can connect with Tom on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram at Tom Broback, and that's TOMBROBACK. I really appreciate your time. I really do. And let's stay in touch. Let's keep this conversation going. Anytime you have any questions for me, or you want to talk about J-Jets, you want to see my gritty privately, I'll show you how I can gritty. I've been working on it. Yeah, I've been working on my gritty, and it's reached a pretty high level. So I can hit the gritty anytime you want.
Oh, thanks for having me on, Tommy. I appreciate it. And it's fun talking about this stuff, especially someone who's lived it and has those same ideas, even with a slightly different but adjacent profession. Strength and conditioning, physical therapy are adjacent but similar. It's really good to hear some of the stuff that I preach. You've preached your whole career.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. This brings us to the end of today's podcast. I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did. The response to the podcast has been amazing, and I really appreciate everyone that continues to listen in every Wednesday. Please do us a favor, give us a 5-star rating, and continue to share it with your friends. That's very important. For more information about the Moffitt Method remote speed, strength, and conditioning program, please visit our website, themoffittmethod.fit, or email us at info@themoffittmethod.fit. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you again next Wednesday. Bye-bye.